any of these kind of transparent circles right here are existing trees from the survey. So you've got, we're proposing to try to work between the existing crepe myrtles with our bike parking and other connections. And then any of these darker green trees are all new trees being added. So the proposal is basically keeping all of the street trees we can. There weren't really any street trees along Blue Ridge, and there's a lot of redoing of the street infrastructure anyways. And then, again, filling in everywhere else we can with additional street trees and green space. Does that help?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, you will be taking out some street trees.
Possibly, yeah. I think there is a bit of a curb cut right here.
Yeah.
To get access to for the church. There may be a handful of trees, but obviously if we can shift those trees that haven't been planted, I mean they're little crepe myrtles, they haven't been there several years, but not that long. If they're replaceable, we'll move them, otherwise we'll replant. So.
All right, well, again, we appreciate your coming this meeting and the last meeting, and for those of us who want to hear more, NPU next week, we will be revisiting this issue.
Is it possible to ask for a vote from y'all to support whatever decision Virginia-Highland and NPUN makes?
I think that probably is possible. I don't know if it's possible right now,
Okay.
but I think it's highly likely. We have a lot of faith in Virginia-Highland, and we've broadly supported all the stuff they've done. So, I mean, yeah, why don't you fluff up? Can we trade you fluffing up the bike lane? I think we will. I think that's highly possible. I really do. If they, what is?
We are meeting with them on Thursday to finalize things.
Why don't you ask them this? Why don't you ask them? I mean, they're great. We really tight with them. Why don't you ask them to send us their motion and the briefest explanation of it, and ask us for our support, and coming from them.
Okay.
I think it's highly probable that we would do it.
Yeah.
Next month would be okay, or do they need something?
Well, I guess the question is for if we're going to the NPU next week, the question is what does the NPU need from y'all and what we're presenting?
Well, you're going to get a lot of conceptual support of the notion and of the principles that underlie it, and the attempts to make it minimize the impacts of traffic, to make accessibility, and we're certainly.
What we'll do, let's go through Thursday, we'll coordinate with you guys, and if it's a motion you guys make next month. Because we have a special use permit to go through too as well, so.
We can do it by email, I think, if there's a real need. Is that all right with everyone?
Yep.
I think there's a lot of support for it, and we wish you luck, and we see everything you can do. We're trying to figure out. We're struggling with many of these challenges in the master plan. How to accommodate different needs, very difficult. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you next week, and we'll see what we can do. But if you'll ask them to write us,
We'll see where our Thursday goes, and if it wraps up in a
thanks, Eric. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Thanks.
So that's what I'm saying. But they'll figure it out. Why don't they just go ahead and vote Powell in and get it over with?
Our next agenda item is a quick discussion of the City of Atlanta. Here we go. It's replatting, alley replatting policy. So we've had a number of discussions about alleys and who owns them in Virginia-Highland. Like many neighborhoods in the city, we have abandoned alleys. Until, Winnie, please, Debbie, you can join in if you like with comments on this, but because I'm going to try to recount what I think we know the history to be. Actually, we had an anecdotal report, to our knowledge, that was not a current written policy, and Winnie remembers one from some time back, but we couldn't lay our hands on one. We asked Aaron Fortner, our planning consultant, to talk to Bob Zeckler, who used to be the attorney for the Department of Planning, and got a recount of what Bob, who's still highly respected in this field, considered to be the policy. And I think it is the policy that to some degree is there in front of you, with the exception of 3 alleys downtown that the city retained ownership of. When they abandoned the alleys, a point made possible by the institution of, by the institution of Herbie Kirby's, one of Andrew Jackson's better moments, for sure, in the first, it was no longer necessary to go down rear alleys with small garbage carts and pick up garbage, which is how it was done when I first lived in this neighborhood. It was a royal mess, and dogs knocked them over, and it was just terrible. And so this reduced the labor force, reduced costs, resulted in better capacity, cleaner neighborhoods, and the alleys were been. And some of them had utility poles down, sometimes, some did not. Some of them were used for access to the rear of lots for parking, some never were. And when the city abandoned them, functionally, their position was that they fell under the control of the adjacent owners, 50%. In those cases where it was clean and neat, a little more complicated sometimes on corners, but that was the position. We normally encountered it here when folks tried to build in the alleys, which is not permitted. We encounter it sometimes when folks do variances. You're typically allowed to use your half of the alley for your setback purposes, but you're not allowed to use your, quote, half of the alley for lot coverage, because in fact, technically, it is not, you do not own it, in fact. And the other time that would come to pass is when an existing use of some time was changed informally. If somebody tried to put something in the alley that made it no longer possible to traverse an alley that people had traversed, or sometimes if folks tried to open an alley up, that would cause consternation. In the street where I happen to live, the section has been closed for many years. Folks are used to the quiet and privacy, but if you go just one block over, it's been used for access in the rear of homes for many years. All these owners are quite used to these existing wholly different uses. And they're not alleys in every case behind every set of properties, but there it stood. So in a case from another neighborhood, the city issued this memorandum on July the 3rd of this year, and it more or less clarified what Mr. Zeckler had reported to Mr. Fortner and what we understood to be the case. Little did we know that within a couple of weeks we would have a case in front of us that pertained directly to this policy. The policy that's in front of you does outline a methodology for acquiring ownership of your half of the property should you wish to do so. It's a not easy thing to do, but they do outline a policy there of how to do it. The case that came before us is a zoning case, a variance application this month on Todd Road. And Winnie, I'll ask you again to join in because Winnie lives on Adair. That is an alley that runs in the rear of Adair in the corner of Todd at the western end of Adair where it bumps into Todd Road right there where it comes down from the bank. The owners, the circumstances that obtain in this case are actually not described fully, not anticipated by the city. In this instance, the owners on Todd have a deed description that fully incorporates the entire alley in their deed description. Unusual set of circumstances and not completely clear how this came to pass. Documentation is not thorough, shall we say. It may be discoverable, but we don't know it. And this description obtained before they bought the house. This is not something that, there's not any suggestion that they somehow nefariously scuttled around and did something, not a hint of that. So they made a variance application, which was sent in through us in the normal channels, and they claimed full ownership of the alley for lot coverage purposes, which they needed because they would have been drastically over 50% in a separate variance. And for setback purposes, which was less of an issue, but in any case, it came with the admonition that it was conditioned upon the replatting, the pending replatting of the alley, because the alley on the city's property plans did not show fully in their lot at all, even though their deed description does describe it. On the city's platted records, it shows as an alley. The application was submitted for variance on the 13th, and the owners quite properly, I think, met with the City of Atlanta Planning Department and were advised, and at this point I'm using the word reportedly from now on, which is my way of saying this is second or third hand, were advised and asked to notify their adjacent neighbors and gain their consent for the replatting, notwithstanding their deed description. The owners made, I think, a good faith effort to notify the 5 adjacent neighbors, 4 directly beside them and 1 catty corner. 3 signed and agreed, consented to this. 1 was out of town and never notified. The 5th was Mr. Kirschenbaum, I'm not speaking, I believe this is public or acknowledged at this point, who was catty corner and did not agree and did not sign. He was catty corner at the rear of the alley. When this came to us, we didn't, want to proceed on the variance until the replatting was completed because it did not seem appropriate and it would have been irrelevant. And so we tried to validate and see where the replatting was. As it turned out, the replatting, it now appears, was approved by the city and has been given a number, an official replatting number with an RP. On January the 23rd, something that we discovered rather belatedly when he went down and made some inquiries, and I went down and made some inquiries because, well, not because I was trying to pass judgment on the merits of the replatting, but on the case, but because we really needed to know if it were so. It was not a happy conversation that I had with the planning department, and I was disturbed by the following pieces. There was no written statement as to the replatting. I asked for a formal statement. On this date, we made this decision, and here it is. It didn't exist. I was informed by the representative that his signature on approving the variance was sufficient. One of the owners had not been notified, period, of the replatting. It had all happened in 10 days, as it turned out. Insufficient time, in my opinion, for any normal response to have been made. Again, I'm not commenting at all on the quality of the decision. It may be a reasonable decision under the circumstances, but I did feel the process was terribly flawed. The next development, Mr. Kirschenbaum objected and tried to get attention from the folks down there. And one of the reasons that's relevant about the date of the decision is that it's an appealable decision, 30 days to the Bureau of Zoning Adjustment, but only appealable once you know what the date of the decision was and have the decision in hand. And in fact, there didn't seem to be a document that actually described when the decision had been made, and we had to infer it for some time.
January 23rd.
It was January 23rd, we later inferred, and now the Bureau of Planning has in the reaction to this, has decided that it is. Ms. Curry.
Although when I was down there speaking with the person who issued it, that was the 24th, and he told me that he issued it that day.
Right. So maybe it was the 24th, but in any case, it's the 23rd. And it matters because if an appeal was to be made, you certainly needed to know what your deadline for the appeal was. It's 30 days. In any case, it seemed to me to be extraordinarily informal for the certification of the transfer of real property, which is not a casual item in this society and in our neighborhood. The next development was that the missing neighbor returned, showed up from out of the country where she'd been for a couple of weeks, and she objects vigorously to and contests the decision, and a meeting was scheduled to discuss this with the Bureau of Planning. That meeting has now been postponed in the wake of snowstorm Ivan that has descended upon us. In any case, I would like this board's thoughts, and I feel like it's appropriate, as I looked at the policy, which is in front of you, the city's alley policy, they describe a notification process that I think is reasonably normal. I asked the planner why there had not been a request to send a registered letter to the owners of record. For the replanting, why there had not been a 30 days or so given for a normal response. I was not trying to comment on the merits of the decision. The people asking it have some evidence that seems to support their case, not commenting on it. But very unhappy about the rather rushed fashion, and pointed out, I didn't see what the rush was, that the variances are often deferred, and there was no harm to be done from deferring the variance for 30 days until such period had been, so forth. There was no, to my answer, logical response to any of those questions. It's just the way it's been done, and that's that.
With respect to, there's still an appeal period, right? Or,
Well, there is an appeal period, as it turns out, from the 23rd. That's right. My suggestion, and I would be glad to entertain suggestions from particularly our lawyers on board, but I would like, my suggestion is that the city ought to put their decision in abeyance, notify the owners properly, ask for a period of time for comment, and then remake the decision as best they know based on whatever evidence they have at the end of that period. I further did not like the fact that the applicant circulated the letter of acquiescence, that there was no neutral party to appeal to, no one who seemed in possession of the facts, and that the city very casually and informally, in my opinion, has approved this transfer of property without hearing or giving folks a right to be heard on the issue. I don't think it poses an imminent danger in Virginia-Highland, because presumably very few of us have neighbors who have a deed description that shows that they own our half of the alley, but in fact none of us really know that. I certainly do not go down and search my neighbor's deed descriptions, and none of us do. And I'm not suggesting it was done legally or illegally.
We have claims of ownership for people that have squatted on other people's alleys for many years.
Well, the adverse possession argument is one that can be made if anybody wants to make it. I'm not trying to get us into making the decision about the merits of the case. I think the city is the group that ought to do that. I just think they ought to do it with a chance for everybody that wants to be heard in a normal fashion, in a normal manner.
what's the likelihood of the department or the city agreeing to that request if we make it? I mean, is there precedent for doing that?
Agreeing to hold the decision in abeyance and reconsider it, I would not care to guess, but I would not think that it's, just speaking what you also know, that many departments in any government, once they make a decision, tend to defend it. But I do not know, but I think it's a reasonable request, and
I was just wondering if you had any prior knowledge that.
I do not have any, nor do I know what the owners, what the other appellants might do in terms of filing an appeal to force the issue. That is up to them. We're not, I just don't think it's reasonable that homeowners could leave town on the 13th and on the 23rd return to find that the city has replatted their half of the alley that this other woman asserts she owns. And I'm not defending either claim here, I'm just reporting.
Isn't this memorandum from James Shelby stating that the planning office acted inappropriately at the last paragraph in granting this change of the property?
That was a separate case and specific facts that he's referring to in a specific case.
Okay.
This is not about this case at all.
Okay.
This is their memorandum January the 3rd, in which they did nonetheless formalize many of their arguments,
Okay.
general principles
Okay.
with which they approach such questions. Jennifer, do you have thoughts? Jenny?
Did anybody at the city research how and when it appeared on the deed? I mean, there has to be a chain if there was a conveyance anywhere.
I asked about that when I was down there talking to Christian Alton, who is the man who did the replatting. So I said, can you show me a record of where these property owners a long time ago, because they can be different from the ones that are there now, can you show me where they signed to give up their half of the alley? And he said no. And I also asked him, is there a claim to adverse possession here? And he said, no, there is not. That's just,
Yeah, I mean, Christian usually doesn't get in the title research, it's usually, in my experience, it's usually the applicants that bring it to him to try to make a case, but I've never seen him down in the records department of Fulford and have the.
no, I think it would be up to the
Yeah.
people at 979 Todd Road
Right,
people to
right.
bring him to proof of that.
Right.
Well, I actually don't, in any case, that would seem to be a reasonable approach, that you would submit such evidence as you have. And my concern here simply was that the owner was gone for 10 days, came back and discovered that she no longer, her claim to half the alley had been, was now denied by the city. And I really just wanted to have her bite of the processed apple. These folks may have a reasonable claim. We have declined to comment whatsoever on the merits of the claim that is beyond our knowledge and expertise. The city is the group that ought to do that, but I think they ought to do it in a reasonable, fair way that allows everyone to be heard in a reasonable manner. And I don't know, I don't even think we have a claim. We do not have any standing to appeal, none whatsoever. Only the adjacent impacted owners have such standing, is my understanding. So, but I would like to make the point nonetheless, so that the city, even if there is no appeal and this ruling stands, I would hope that Mr. Shelby and Ms. Jacks might reflect upon this approach and refine it for the future to ensure that this doesn't happen. I just don't, it makes me very uneasy, though I think it's improbable that other people, that this will be, council, I don't think we need to claim our horse as a white one, that we're riding nobly to the rescue of property owners. It probably isn't an issue, but it could be, and it's not. Anyway, I would like the board's approval to support a more formal process that includes the right, formal notification of owners, a reasonable amount of time to be heard and to respond and make their own case, and that that the city should be the group submitting the notification to owners. There's a number of issues here. They ought to submit the notification to the owners. They ought to put a deadline for receiving information. They should then issue a written policy, and which can be clearly appealed if anyone feels it's flawed or not. Those are the issues that distress me about this, that this was kind of done informally. Then, as luck would have it, in terms of the urgency argument, which is one Mr. Altonet made to me, we got to get going on this variance. The applicants deferred the variance anyway for other reasons, which is not, as we know, unusual at all. So so much for that. But and furthermore, if any of the applicants do appeal it, the variance will be even further deferred pending resolution of that. So this didn't turn out to be much of a time saver to me. It looked like, anyway, I'll wait your thoughts. I believe that VHCA should opine that the process needs to be formal, written, established, and followed. And
are you suggesting writing a letter to them, or what?
I was suggesting originally going down to accompany the woman who is distressed and not opining whatsoever on the merits of the claim, but on the process, and then writing a letter to that effect.
I think it needs to be in writing.
And then I think we need to follow it up with Mr. Wan if there's no satisfaction here, because this is just a poor way to do business.
This is specifically for replatting involving property and alleyways.
Yes, yes, that, I'm not trying to rewrite real estate law.
No, just not a regular replat, but when you got their alleyway portion where it really gets messy.
It really is unclear, messy, and uncertain.
Well, this clearly states that in order for the city to consider replatting, you have to have documentation of consent from the property owners abutting an alley. Sounded like she didn't provide that, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, and I agree with you, Jess. I mean, as I read that, the broad principles they established it doesn't cover exactly this case, but the broad principles, they did not follow their own broad principles. I found it entirely frustrating and distressing to go through this, and I would think we can the city can do better, and I think we ought to be the ones to ask them to do better on behalf of all potentially impacted owners. Yes, ma'am.
I would just say that there are many places out there where a part of an alley's been closed off, because this is a part of an alley, and that it has been used by someone else for many years. So the person who owns it on one side doesn't know whether or not the person who is on the other side of the alley has taken it into their deed, if it has been incorporated into their deed. So I can see that there could be some other spots out there that are like this.
Yeah, the city should have a neutral role. I'm not commenting on anyone's done with any alley anywhere. It's just that the city ought to be the neutral arbiter, receiver of facts, renderer of decision, and let everybody be fully informed. That's my, yes, ma'am.
You know, my thought is that it seems like every other administrative process that the city handles through the planning department that may impact other people requires a review period. Subdivision request requires a review period, variance request, rezoning, beltline overlay districts, and that this one that would also impact other people should have the same kind of process.
Seems reasonable. Any other comments from anyone? So what does the board want to do? Do we support the process part of this piece, which is the argument I'm making, that we should assert that the process was flawed and that there's no little harm and much gain to be done from following, much good to be gained from following an appropriate process that's more formal and more, is that?
I support that.
Well, with your support, I will write such a letter, I'll circulate it to everybody, and I will try to attend the now rescheduled meeting with Ms. Jacks to assert this argument. I hope that we get some improvements on it, I hope we never have to hear this again. The next item is the SAP 680 Drury Street. This is an addition, a proposal where we're asked to comment, we have the right to comment on it, doesn't require a decision, for 3 single-family houses immediately on Drury, right adjacent to the Beltline. If you leave Ponce Place and head west, it's on the north side of the road, right behind the single-family houses on Ponce Place, facing Ponce Place. This is a site of a current Quonset hut. It was rezoned and variance was granted there a few years ago. A proposal to build some townhouses was partially approved. They were never built. The property was resold. The current owners are proposing 3 single-family houses with garages. We had the right to comment. The planning, they're due today. We sent them in after getting planning committee. We didn't suggest approval or rejection of it. Here's what we wrote, and I hope the board's okay with it. We just noted simply that it was oddly inconsistent with the goals of the Beltline. That it had no provision, no density, poor transit-oriented development, the barest nod to the concept of live, work, play, and that we didn't contest it or oppose it. We felt it was legal, but that it was an odd play we had always supported the idea of appropriate density in spots where there's zoned for such density, such as this one. And we had opposed inappropriate density, that is in places where the CDP, the Community Development Plan, which is voted on by the NPU every few years and approved by the City Council, rejects greater density, which is a few places along the Beltline. But that most of the Beltline in Virginia-Highland supports greater density, including this area, and we had expected greater density there, and we don't control the development. If that's what the developers want to build, it's fine with us. We noted the irony. And the backdrop of this is that there have been occasional proposals to try to build much greater density in traditional single-family areas of the Beltline along in Virginia-Highland, and we have vigorously, with the NPU support, led by Ms. Keenan, have managed to beat those back, and we continue to assume that that will be our stance. And so we're disappointed not to have it here, although we have no quarrel particularly with any of the structures or anything, just seems like a chance missed. And that's what we wrote. And we added in some comments about affordable housing had been contemplated here, workforce housing had been contemplated here, none of which can be found obviously in a three-home single-family development. And that's it. So we tried to stay neutral but make a point about where density ought to occur and where we've supported it and where density ought to occur, because we sure have opposed it there. Master plan update, Ms. Keenan, Ms. Wyndham.
Thank you. So we had a little bit of a setback from the weather in January for the master plan process. We have been meeting, I guess monthly for the steering committee, and we pushed that meeting back. So everything else is sort of pushed a little bit back, and it's only going to be more opportunity for people to comment. So the website right now is byhighmasterplan.org, And it is available for comments for all of the things that were discussed on the January 22nd public meeting. We had a really great turnout, and those comments are still available for people to comment if you thought of something since then or weren't available to go that night. So we're going to be continuing to gather comments through the website. There's, I think the draft is starting to be shaping up, and we're going to be reviewing it more formally at the board meeting for this organization in March. So that will be a good meeting to come and talk about the draft itself. And the draft is also going to be available on the website for comment and review, and it'll continue to be shaped as, you know, as comments are made. Then in April, I think is where we're shooting for neighborhood approval of the master plan. And our timeline's flexible. If we need to push that back, we can, but we are looking forward to getting it heard at a public meeting in, I believe, June. So that's sort of the overall timeline. I know that hasn't really been firmed up too much with dates hard set in the ground. So the upcoming voice will have more details about the timeline and about when you can expect to see a draft, comment on a draft, when to see a final draft, and that kind of thing. So we're looking forward to just seeing how the draft is shaped up and other comments and
I asked John as far as the comments that were collected at the meeting and then what's being collected over the website. Can those be visible?
they're not public comments. Mostly that's because a lot of the process has been public discussion and committees and groups. That we thought it was really important that people had an avenue for private feedback. So you might not want to say, you know, something different from your neighbor, so they're not going to be public.
It will not be public.
No. So yeah, so that's just to protect people who want to say.
And I think they're reflected in the general tenor of the piece. I mean, if you or 5 other people objected vigorously, I can think of one set of bulb outs that's not going to appear in the master plan, I can assure you, because I don't think all those comments got on there, but I think everybody got the general notion after about 25 comments about the bulb outs on a certain street that maybe that wasn't, it's not a
Something that was
popular notion.
Okay.
So
So-
I hope you'll see the general tenor of the comments at least reflected in some form. If not, write in, and if you have another point, you want to make sure you're being heard, you can write Jen or Jess, and we want to hear from you. Everybody wants to hear from you. I mean, the best part of this, I've been astonished at the number of comments that have been made and how many of them are brand new. I mean, apparently if you ask reasonably intelligent people to make comments, a lot of them do. I mean, amazing, it's amazing. I mean, it's stunning how many comments have come in and how bright and unexpected many of them have been, and how many things I would have bet you real money there wasn't sentiment for, but there is. I mean, I'm amazed. So I think it's been fascinating. One of my favorite things was walking around in that meeting, reading those comments. I was just fascinated by it. It was amazing.
Really good meeting.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good meeting with a lot of really good comments.
And that meeting is available online too, if you want to see the video of it. And kind of Erin's whole presentation is available, so if you want to know the reason behind something, that would be a good place to start.
Or not. From what I understand is that you have the proposed items, there are 8 of them, I think there are 8 things or topics. And then these are things that are being considered for the master plan. And so then you're throwing them out there for consideration and comment, good, bad, or indifferent. And then from a standpoint is that if you have a comment that is good, then y'all weigh in on it, that's being received by the neighborhood. If it's negative, I would assume that you would think that would be received negatively and not be something that would be included in the master plan. But I'm assuming that.
Sure, and there's of course a gray area of maybe not positive or negative, but what about this instead? Or, hey, I parked there. You know, there's all kinds of different comments for how to change an idea so that it would work better for everybody. But yeah, it's absolutely incorporated, and it's been really interesting to just see how ideas have evolved in the process. just from what people weighing in and saying, you know, what might work better in a certain street or overall.
Yes, ma'am.
So when the board votes on the master plan,
Mhm.
so are you going to take it as just one ball of wax, or is it going to be broken down into segments that you vote on?
Well, I think like any proposition that comes before you, first of all, there'll be a version of it written and put up for comment. We're not through getting comments yet. We're gonna be commenting away. And secondly, you can certainly try to convince, make suggestions about things that ought to be amended. I'm sure there will be some, and I'm sure it's all gonna have features in there that some of us don't like, including me, I suspect. But them's the breaks, and that's what we do. So make your arguments. I mean, it's really, I've been impressed by the high level of the discussion and the attempts to persuade based on logic and best outcomes for the neighborhood. And I think
So
it's.
that still doesn't answer my question.
Well,
To answer your question, Winnie, yes, we will
Yes,
vote on the
I think
whole
I did.
thing. We vote on the plan as a comprehensive document, not.
But it could be
piecemeal.
amended, in the process. Sir?
Where exactly is the historic designation proposal in this, and what's the level of support that you've gained?
It's not in it at all. That was an effort brought forth independent of this board and this association by citizens who are fired up about it. And so it's not, as a proposal, the wording in it is not anticipated in the master plan at all. Some of the concerns that it addresses are being addressed in a variety of ways in the master plan and had been right from the start. I mean, if you talk, I'm sure you could do some master theses, do a successful master's thesis going through and looking at the principles that underlie this and see how they emerge in a variety of ways. But I hope that answered your question. I'm not trying to.
Though it's not a historical overlay, the verbiage or what I'm gleaning from it is that we are now calling it a neighborhood guideline, which will.
Now calling it,
A neighborhood guideline.
the it is what, I'm sorry.
As far as oversight.
That's talking historic designation. Are you talking historic designation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
right.
not what we're talking about at all.
Okay.
They are two separate
It's
initiatives.
not
There are two separate
No.
initiatives.
Okay.
Okay.
There's nothing.
There are two separate
There are
initiatives.
two, so there's nothing as far as in the plan now that, as far as neighborhood guidelines, that are gonna have anything that's lays on top of zoning. There's not an initiative there that
Not in the
says,
master plan.
Not in the master plan,
master
okay.
plan. My earlier remark was that many of these issues are inextricably related in
Right.
various different ways. And so I was trying to make that point.
and
Any other comments or questions? I mean, I'll be glad to talk to you afterwards if
Right.
you want to talk. Any other? All right, we're on to 2014 goals and budgets. Jack White and Peggy Berg. So why haven't the goals been posted? It's because I didn't post them, but the reason we didn't post them was we have them and I'll be glad to put them on. But because they're inextricably linked to our budget, which Ms. Berg has some information she may or may not want to. Do you have any? We haven't set on the budget because Ms. Berg has been meeting with anything you want to say on this?
Yeah,
I had a
actually.
feeling there was.
This civic association has had several really good years financially and has done an excellent job of shepherding its assets. So as we come out with the master plan, we find ourselves coming out with a master plan for the neighborhood at the same time that we have some assets available we can invest back into the neighborhood to maybe trigger some of the initiatives that are in the master plan, to maybe move some things along for the neighborhood, to maybe leverage some, I don't know, some other investments that might happen down the road. We also potentially have some funds available that we could use to reduce the debt on New Highland Park at least a bit, which would shorten the amount of time that we would carry that debt, which would be which would make the association a little more secure and make the park a little bit more secure. So it's kind of an exciting opportunity, and I'm personally really pleased that the master plan comes along at the time when we have these funds available to maybe do something about it. So we've set up a meeting for the board to talk about the budget and about some opportunities and about how it might best benefit the neighborhood to invest the funds that the association has at this point. So that meeting's scheduled, and after the meeting, it would just be to make a plan. It wouldn't be to spend the money, and then after the meeting, the board would come back here to present the ideas and the discussion and to bring that matter to a vote.
So would those be budget items? Is that the point? Is that what you're saying?
Ultimately, they'd be budget items, right.
So we've been very frugal. The master plan has been costly. We've been frugal. We've been trying to husband our money to make sure we had everything we needed to do a good master plan, to be well informed, to hire good consultants that did good research. As Mr. Kronberg's gone from us, but his ilk are not cheap. There's a reason, because they actually have a lot of skills and did a lot of research here. So anyway, things are going okay. And what we do for goals this year is inextricably tied to how much money we think we have to do it, and how much money we need to hold in reserve for future pieces, and how much money we can pay down this debt at New Highland Park, which we're very conscious of. We're always worried about that debt at New Highland Park. It's a real responsibility of the people around this board table. We gotta take care of it. So Peggy's been trying to make some recommendations about what our healthy level of reserves we always have had. And we're trying to figure out how much flexibility we have with that to be safe. And she's been trying to dive in it. You might think it's not as easy to figure it out as you might think. And we do have some good news on this, actually, about the master plan payment.
Yes, Aaron Watson pledged to provide financial support for the master plan. He pledged a $2,500 grant, and the grant money was received today. So even though he's no longer in office, his office fulfilled that commitment to us. So we've had a $2,500 grant from Aaron Watson, and we also have a $2,500 grant from Councilman Juan. So City Council has provided some funds for the master plan process.
Which they do routinely for neighborhoods who are undertaking it, which is great. So way to go, Jennifer and Jess, on getting that money in.
Jacqueline, next question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have a ballpark figure of how much the master plan will cost?
$50,000.
It's in the $50,000 ballpark.
Stay tuned, that's close.
No, I don't
No,
think
that was
it's not
the-
gonna go, it's not getting out of control. I mean, we're quite careful of that, but I mean, but we're damn grateful for Mr. Watson and Mr. Juan's support, I will tell you that. You wanna switch over to the safety committee? That's now you as well.
Yes. The safety committee has nothing new to report. The city obviously has not done the sidewalks for which we paid them. They originally committed that they would start on it by February 28th. So I'm encouraging them to keep to their commitment, at least to start.
There's the alley on St. Charles, there's been some progress on that.
Oh, yeah. We had a remarkable volunteer, a guy named Jack White, was informed of a
Yeah.
safety and security problem on, there's two alleys between Ponce and St. Charles. One is largely paved and used to access parking lots, and the other one you can get down, but it's kind of the kind of track that you would find alongside of a field with shrubs growing alongside of it, and that had been used as a nesting ground. And so when we became aware of that, Jack went and cleared out all the nests, disposed of all the debris, and we've been talking a little bit about how we might stop that problem from coming back again?
Well, I mean, that wasn't what I was gonna prove, but thanks, yeah, I did do it just because we got rid of some trash and I have an old pickup truck and it fit in there. But more of the points, I went to the folks at Open Hand and asked them about notifying us trash everywhere, and we put up signs, said it's coming out, and the neighbors are restless, this is private property, and I'm sorry, but you folks are gonna have to go. I don't know if that's gonna do it, I think we're gonna have to get police in to get folks off private property, and it's not a good scene, but neither is lying around. There's some folks struggling there, and it's not a good scene in the alley, it needs to improve, so part of it is cleaning up. And the neighbors are coming back with a second level cleanup, I think this coming Saturday, the 22nd, and we'll try to be out for that as well. I think we're about to we're wrapping up, so that was good stuff. Calendar items, Ms. Carlisle.
The only one I have, besides that Jess mentioned a lot for the master plan, is that on Sunday, 2/23, we've committed to get together to finalize goals and attach budgets so we can get all of that finished and online. And the Inman Middle School, I'm not sure of any of the dates on this, but there have been meetings on the Inman Middle School expansion.
It's a good article, I mean, a pretty good article from the Morningside rep who wrote a decent about the expansion. This is the first take, probably the way it's gonna look. We had the first meeting with Inman. It is probably as good a plan as we could have hoped for. It attaches the expansion on 2 levels, but both up and around the gymnasium. It proposes a slight expansion along Park Drive to accommodate school buses, which we didn't love and we thought wouldn't occur, but I think that's what they think they need. And to their surprise, we were concerned when they drew in the pledge from the superintendent was that the fields would be restored when the trailers were taken out. They show a partial parking lot in there. We did not react positively to that just because it's not what was proposed, but we think we can recover the parking that's going to be lost quite easily in other sites there. We're looking at a couple ideas, and I think they're perfectly thrilled at the thought of not putting the parking lot in because the stormwater mitigation is enormous cost. And if you want to see, anyone in the neighborhood wants to see it, drive down the west alley behind the south alley opposite the entrance to the library parking lot and go the other way, and you'll see an enormous stormwater cistern being put underground at a huge cost to accommodate a future development going in there. And so this is what the school board would be thrilled not to have to put in. And we would be thrilled to have the fields. More relevantly, the principal wants the fields for field use. She was extremely eloquent about her need. They have not enough room. They didn't have enough room before the expansion, and then they had, so she wants the room for field use, and they need the room for field use, and that's what they had pledged to do. Sir, did you have your hand up?
We can talk offline.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to remind people that Trees Atlanta and the neighborhood will be planting trees on Saturday, February 22nd, 9 o'clock, meeting at Highland Park. And if you have not planted with the neighborhood, it's just a great thing to do. It'll make you feel good. And John has written a fantastic article about where the sites are going to be. So come on out and help people plant trees. 9 o'clock.
How long do you want to take? How long do they come?
They usually finish by 12.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it's quick. It's work.
They have it on the side.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I managed to miss parks, I'm sorry. Lauren and David and John,
David,
Sure, yeah,
sorry about that.
I guess fairly briefly, big news there with the work at John Howell Park. The plans have been approved, now by Parks and by the city. So the major development there, I guess now the next step is to move forward for permitting. That's about it, Jack. I mean, in a nutshell, it's good news. It's a forward progress. I think, storm aside, if we can get the permitting process knocked out, should clear our way for starting progress fairly, not going to throw any dates out, but fairly quickly.
We've learned not to throw any dates. We have learned not to put out dates.
You have anything to add, Jack, or?
No, I'm optimistic. The contractor is right about more or less, a little bit of inflation, but more or less on cost, on as intended, and should be about 8 weeks, which means what, Joe? 12? Okay, well, in any case,
Depends on what kind of springtime weather we have.
I think it'll be beautiful. I think everybody's gonna notice an astonishing upgrade. It's gonna really look nice on that side, on the west end of the park. Meanwhile, Walter Bland is plugging away, literally, in this case, he's put in a ton of liriope, trying to define, deal with, there's gonna be planting, because people have requested it on the east end of Virginia there. He's put in a lot of liriope to deal with the erosion at the bottom and on the adjacent banks, trying really hard to define the areas of the park. There's a concept in place, getting the plant material mix to frame it so we can get it going. And I think in a year, the place is gonna be, especially, you know, if we don't have to pay for another master plan next year, which would be nice.
Who maintains the rubber surface of the playground?
City of Atlanta, that's their business. You're talking about the whole occasional holes that are in it,
Well,
the sand.
well, and I mean, there's weeds growing up and it's kind of a mess.
Well, we can ask Walter to try to get rid of the weeds, but the city needs to redo that. That's part of their safety commitment to the infrastructure of the park. We don't touch safety.
Is the concern that, is it weeds or are there actually deterioration or what's the?
Well, the weeds would be a sign of deterioration.
Same thing. Yeah.
So if weeds are growing, the surface is deteriorating.
So we need
and
to
it's probably
photograph
not-
it and send it in and notarize. So where are you, I think I know where you're talking about. You're talking about on the upper playground on, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I know.
Or, you know, we could, I mean,
I know what
there's
that is.
testing that can be done too to show that it is put in place.
We probably get a liability lawyer to do that.
Jack, can we do something in the very next voice on the park?
Yeah, well, I will try to finish it, I'm sorry, yeah.
That's all right. I mean,
You know,
it wasn't
much of it
anything
will
big.
refer back to the original article that we wrote, which is still solid, but we do need to update it, and we really have talked about, and we need to do it, just trying to explain section by section what Walter has. We've always had that in place, this concept for every single section of the park. And there's some good stuff going on, the gully got fixed, as we mentioned, mostly, and there are leaves being, we're really working on that baked soil in the rear to get it biologically alive, so there's really some good things happening there. They're really optimistic about John Howell Park. And
Also on a good note, I had a local, basically Bayhigh-based landscape guy offer to do whatever basic, we want to have him do basic maintenance at the Triangle Island. I mean, we don't want him to step on Noni's toes, I mean, but if we want, you know, clean up, weeding, he wants a specific list, but he'll do that in exchange for a pad for us.
let's
Done.
talk.
Sold.
Now you're talking. There's no further business. We're adjourned at 8:51.
Jack.
Don't forget your gloves.
And as I said, I agree.
You're either believe it or not.
I'm not believing it.
I'll mention
I'm gonna let, you know, Jack and, sorry.
Yeah, that's what I figured, but
Just to make sure that we know.